She was making coffee the next morning when her grandfather's door opened and he came out, dressed in his Civil War uniform. The blue coat was buttoned smartly up to the turn-down collar. A cartridge belt encircled his gently bulging waist. His skull cap was replaced by a jaunty forage cap, and a sheepish smile bathed his face. "Grandpa," said Emily, "how nice you look." "Do I?" he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Turn around. You even shined your shoes." "Of course. In the army you have to shine your shoes, or your sergeant gives you billy hell. Will you pin on my badge and the medal?" "I'd be proud to." She fastened the red, white, and blue emblem of the Grand Army of the Republic and the Civil War medal on his chest while he stood sternly erect. He inspected them with satisfaction in the wavering kitchen mirror. "Shall we go out and pick a snowball?" "Not yet," she answered. "We want it to be fresh. You don't go to the schools until 9, you know." Deep Valley's old soldiers always visited the schools on Decoration Day morning. Then the schools, shops, and offices closed, and at 1:30 came the parade. Emily poured the coffee and dished out bowls of steaming oatmeal, while her grandfather, removing the forage cap reluctantly, sat down at the kitchen table. The heat from the range felt comfortable, for there was a layer of ice in the air. "Remember how hot it was last year?" she asked. "I certainly do. You never can tell about May." "I'm glad it's going to be cool for the marching. You won't walk very far, though, will you, Grandpa?" He chuckled. "Just far enough to show the mare there's life in us old boys yet." When she started to wash the dishes, he said, "Emmy, it's 8 o'clock now. Oughtn't we to pick a snowball?" "In a minute," she answered, but he couldn't wait. While she worked, she could see him from a window, walking around the snowball bush in eager anticipation. Smiling, she ran out to join him. The sun was higher now, glittering on the trees with their small, new leaves on the dewy grass. Emily, too, circled the bush, inspecting the luscious white clumps. "Snowball is too cold a name for them," she said. Selecting the finest, she cut it carefully. He looked stern again while she pinned it on his chest. "Now, you look very nice. I'll go to the gate and wait for the auto. Tell them about Gettysburg and your very best style." "By jingo, I will," he answered happily. Emily put the chicken to stew and made a pudding. While she worked, she thought about the old soldiers coming to the schools when she was a child. Judge Hodges used to tell them about Nashville, and old Captain Klein about fighting the Sioux. How proud she had been of her grandfather. Taking a dust cloth, she went into the parlor. This was almost as her grandmother had left it. Emily was a little ashamed of the old-fashioned look, but she thought that her grandfather was too old for change. Enlarged photographs hung on the walls, along with a hair wreath and a picture showing a weeping widow at a tombstone. Wax flowers bloomed under a glass dome. There were a black walnut sofa and chairs, upholstered in horsehair, a secretary with books behind glass, and an old, square, yellow-keyed piano. She set the table with a linen cloth and her grandmother's Haviland china, and walked down to the slough, picked some blue flags with their sword-shaped leaves for the center of the table. Before the chicken was tender, her grandfather came in, glowing. Loosening his collar, he sank down in his chair and told her about his success at the schools. He went reluctantly, at her urging, to lie down, and when she called him for dinner, he bounced up with bright eyes. While they ate, he told her about his triumphs again. His snowball was showering small flowerets now, and Emily went out and picked another. She pinned it on his coat. "Now you rest while you wait for the judge." "Rest, rest. We didn't get much rest marching to Gettysburg." "I know, but today you're just marching to Lincoln Park. And see that you don't go any farther." They both laughed. "Here's Judge Hodges now," she added as the doorbell jingled. In contrast to her grandfather, the judge was tall and bony, with a white beard flowing to his waist. He, too, wore the dapper forage cap and a snowball on his chest. "I've been telling Grandpa not to walk too far," said Emily. "Just what my daughter has been nagging me about. I told her we marched 33 miles to get to Gettysburg." "You and your Gettysburg. At Nashville, we didn't waste time walking. We were too busy fighting." Squabbling and joking, the two old men went out the front door. But halfway down the ragged path, they stopped and came back. Judge Hodges put his hand in his pocket and pulled out a package. "My daughter picked it out for me," he said. "Why, Judge Hodges!" Emily unwrapped it, smiling, and drew out a souvenir spoon. There was a replica of the Deep Valley High School on the handle, with Class of 1912 engraved below. "I'll keep this always. How kind of you." "Well." He smoothed his long beard affectionately, as one might stroke the mane of a favorite horse. "I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, and I understand that you're one of the top honor students. Have an oration to give." "I've heard her recite it," Grandpa Webster put in proudly. "It's about—" "What is it about now, Emily?" "Jane Addams." "That's right, Jane Addams. It's fine, too." "I don't see how Cy Webster could have such a smart granddaughter," said the judge, giving his old comrade an affectionate whack. They hooked arms and started down the ragged path again, looking somehow younger in their excited gaiety. Emily put the spoon with her other presents and hurried up to her room. She poured water from a pitcher into a bowl and washed, looking at a splasher that showed two frogs fishing. Except for a Deep Valley High School pennant, everything in the little slant-roofed bedroom was old. There was a black walnut bureau with a marble top. The bed was a towering, heavily carved affair, and her grandmother had embroidered the pillow shams. One showed a setting sun, and one showed a rising sun. "Early to bed and early to rise," they said. Emily braided her hair freshly and turned it up with a white ribbon. She put on a white waist and skirt, pinned on a sailor hat, and picked up her jacket, putting a small flag into the buttonhole. The crowd was 3 deep along the sidewalks of Front Street. Horses were pitched on the side streets, and a mounted policeman was trying to keep the roadway clear. Deep Valley people and country folk alike were dressed in their Sunday best. She saw a group of Syrians, the men in thick black suits, the women with bright scarves over their heads. Children were waving starchy new flags, and they were all wearing colored caps. There was an epidemic of colored caps, she noticed. some red, some white, some blue. She stopped in front of the Ray's shoe store. The Ray family had moved away. Mr. Ray's shoe store was someone else's now, but people still called it Ray's. She was looking for a break in the crowd when Jerry Sibley called her. "Here, Emily, you can squeeze in with us." He was standing at the curb with Bobby and another boy about Bobby's age, but larger, husky and ruddy blonde. After a moment, Emily recognized him. He was Bobby Cobb, the nephew of Deep Valley's loved piano teacher. Both Bobbies were wearing their best suits and ties. Their faces shone from soap and water, and their hair was slicked down, under colored caps, of course. Bobby Sibley's was red, and Bobby Cobb's was blue. "What are you all wearing the caps for?" Emily asked. "Don't you know?" answered Bobby Sibley. "We're going to have a living flag up at the exercises. Our caps are different colors, and when we all line up, they make a flag. The red is most important." "It is not!" yelled Bobby Cobb. "It is so." "It isn't?" "Who says it isn't?" "The champion wrestler of the 5th grade," Bobby Cobb shouted and fell upon his companion. "Cut it out, kids," Jerry said. Not only children were getting restless. Anticipation fluttered like the flags. When the policeman went by now, he was greeted with, "When's the parade going to start?" At last, far down the street, the Stars and Stripes Forever sounded in brassy exultation. A decorated automobile led the parade. It used to be a white horse with the head of the GAR riding on it, Emily said. The car was driven by the president of the Automobile Club and carried the mayor, the Methodist minister, and a congressman who kept lifting his high silk hat. Everyone cheered, for the music of the approaching band had already stirred their hearts. It was the policeman's band. A big flag came at the front, and Jerry snatched off his cap, nudging his brother, who snatched off his, and nudged Bobby Cobb. Emily stood very still and straightened her shoulders. The drum major was whirling his baton in deft, white-gloved fingers. Behind him came the trombones, sliding in and out. Then came the baritones, the French horns and the tubas, the jubilant trumpets, the field drums and the bass drums, the saxophones and clarinets. The uniformed policemen marched by, thumping their big feet heavily on the pavement. The firemen followed, clinging to their gleaming trucks. The first band had stopped playing, but another could be heard. No, it wasn't a band. This was the thin, ghostly music of the fife and drum. "When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah, the men will cheer, the boys will shout." A tremendous, emotional roar of welcome almost drowned out the sprightly tune. For the old soldiers were coming, Deep Valley's survivors of the now historic Civil War. 6 old men in blue uniforms with badges and bulging snowball clumps. They were marching in pairs. They didn't keep time very well. One walked with a cane, but they all held themselves with military stiffness. No beard equaled Judge Hodges' beard. There were flourishing mustaches, though, and a goatee, and old Captain Klein's chin whiskers. Cyrus Webster was clean shaven, but his heavy eyebrows bristled with martial grimness. Emily's eyes blurred. "They're only marching a few blocks," she said, addressing Jerry, but speaking to reassure herself. She was glad to observe an automobile ready to receive them, riding slowly just behind. Those old fellows get feebler every year, and fewer, Jerry said. He stopped, remembering that her grandfather was among the marchers. Yes, Emily thought, they got feebler and fewer. And so did the old ladies of the Women's Relief Corps, who were passing now in another automobile, brave in their new bonnets. Her grandmother used to ride with them. She was gone now, and the white horse of memory was replaced by an automobile. Yet Decoration Day was always the same. The high school band, playing "The Girl I Left Behind Me," escorted the veterans of the Spanish-American War. They were still youngish and debonair. The National Guard was younger still, marching with zest, greeted with familiar shouts. At the end, boys and girls swarmed into the street. "Look for us in the living flag," Bobby Sibley called. Emily hurried up to the little pie-shaped Lincoln Park, where the statue of a Union soldier surmounted a sparkling fountain. Folding chairs had been set up beneath a giant elm. She was glad to see her grandfather, looking flushed and happy, sitting next to Judge Hodges, and she watched him fondly as the program took its familiar way. The Star-Spangled Banner, the invocation, the reading of General Logan's orders, tenting tonight on the old campground, which always made her feel lonely, and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which never failed to stir her. The congressman, in Emily's opinion, said too much about the differences between President Taft and ex-President Roosevelt, and not enough about the GAR. At the end came America, and the Bobbies grinned at her out of a living flag. For the long climb up Cemetery Hill, the old soldiers accepted the automobile. Emily joined the crowd walking in that direction and heard herself hailed brusquely. "Em!" Turning, she saw Don, tall and square-shouldered. He had a poise, an air of sophistication, which always marked him out. Her welcoming smile did not betray the excitement she felt as he joined her, swinging to the outside of the walk. He looked gloomy. She sympathized with these moods of dejection, for she was subject to them too. She fought them, but not always with success. "Mind if I smoke?" he asked. "Not at all." He rolled a cigarette. "I certainly need this. Gosh, what a lot of bunk." "Bunk? Decoration Day?" "Don't you think it's bunk?" "Certainly not." Her surprised indignation swept her into speech. "If I had gone out and gotten killed for my country, I'd like to be thanked for it once a year." "These fellows weren't killed." "Well, we're all thinking about the ones who were." "Oh, are we? How many people are thinking about anything except the impression that they are making, or the picnic that they're headed for, or how their feet hurt?" "I imagine that everyone gives a little thought to what the day means," she answered slowly. It meant more to her than to most people, she realized. Those young men of the 1st Minnesota, who had charged so bravely to their death, were almost as real to her as last year's football team. She was saturated with her grandfather's joy and pride in the day, and Don's scornfulness hurt her. "It's so nice," she said in abrupt appeal. It comes in May when everything is so pretty and the children are so clean and excited and the old men so happy. And it's always the same. It's part of growing up in America. Emily, said Don, I'm afraid you're a sentimentalist. He sounded ill-humored and bored. The blaring horn of an automobile scattered the crowd walking in the road. They looked up to see Annette waving from a Rio driven by Gladys Dunn. Skid and Jim Baxter and Nell were also in the car. We've had enough. We're going to Heinz's. Want to come along? They called, stopping the car. Emily shook her head. I have to go to the cemetery. Besides, said Dawn sarcastically, she likes all this. She's been lecturing me, preaching my duty to flag and country. I haven't, Emily cried in distress. Oh, but you have, said Don, his deep voice scornful, and climbed into the car without even saying goodbye. I wish you'd come along, Emily, Annette said. But Emily shook her head. She wasn't resentful. She was used to being left out of boy and girl jaunts. The conversation with Don still rankled, though. He may think I'm wrong, but I think he's wrong. The idea of wanting to deprive the old soldiers of this day, and it doesn't hurt anyone to hear the Gettysburg Address. Clouds were sailing in a bright blue sky above the hilltop cemetery. More speeches were made, and the graves of the veterans received new flags and wreaths of flowers. Aaron Sibley's grave received its share, but it didn't need them. It looked loved and alive. Today means something to the Sibley boys, just as it does to me, Emily thought. She reached home ahead of her grandfather. He looked tired when the automobile left him at the gate, but he was still happy. Now he wanted to talk about the glories of the afternoon. How did we look marching, Emmy? Didn't we cut a dash? You certainly did. Do you know, I think you kept better time than anybody? I always did, he answered. The judge doesn't know his right foot from his left. There were callers with presents for her. Mrs. MacDonald, the Presbyterian minister's wife, brought a framed copy of The Young John the Baptist by Andrea del Sarto. A neighbor from across the street brought beauty pins. There was quite a nice array on the parlor table now. After supper, Emily said, Now, Grandpa, you get to bed. It's been a long day. All right, he answered. But how about playing me a few tunes first? She knew which ones he wanted. She went to the old piano and played and sang A Faded Coat of Blue, Wrap the Flag Around Me, Boys, and The Vacant Chair. When she started Tramp, 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 the Boys Are Marching, her grandfather joined in a quavering voice. And Don Walker would like to take this away from them? Emily thought, pressing hard on the pedals.